Leaked CDC data shows just how worried health officials are about the Delta variant. Suni Lee takes gold in Tokyo, and Love Hate 8 to end the week. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Friday, July 30th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo.
Happy Friday, Jill. This week cannot come to an end soon enough. But here we are once again. And
you didn't have a better day yesterday?
It was better. It was better. I'm just the stress levels in my house right now are like an 11. I'll just put it that way. It's really quite a lot. But anyway, it's all good. And today is Friday, which means, of course, that Jill and I will be in the YouTube live chat for the pod this morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time. If you're listening to this and it is not 9 a.m. Eastern time yet, go on over to youtube.com/Cheddar now. You can watch and chat along with us, and there's plenty to talk about this week.
Yes, and the conversations are always a lot of fun. You get to see me in my rollers because I go on our Cheddar morning show, Wake Up with Cheddar, basically 5 minutes after we stop recording the podcast. Okay, let's get to the news though, Carlo. The Delta variant is more contagious than Ebola and as contagious as the chickenpox, according to an internal CDC document. This is the document that apparently led the agency to reverse its mask guidance earlier this week. It was leaked to the Washington Post and the New York Times last night, but has not been made public by the agency. The document's based on concerning studies of several recent outbreaks, including a July 4th cluster in Cape Cod that shows Delta may be transmitted as easily by vaccinated people as by those who aren't vaccinated. The calculus, though, has not changed on vaccines. The CDC data still shows vaccines highly effective at preventing serious illness, hospitalization, and death.
If you haven't read this, either of these stories in the Post or the Times, I would recommend it. It's a little dense, but it's worth reading. I mean, this document, why was this leaked and not put out by the CDC? Are they trying to make people lose whatever faith they have left in these public health agencies? I mean, this is like outrageous. If you're going to change federal guidance on something like this, you have to address the American public and explain exactly why and what the new guideposts are here. And it's just like, it just feels like this is how things are going to be now, right? I'm going to be sending Francesca off to college and checking the mask policy on the Zeta variant or something. I mean, it's like, it just feels like the die is cast, right? We lost this fight, this war, really. Delta now is going to run rampant, I think, at least in unvaccinated areas, until it burns out. And then hopefully at that point, we're going to be close enough to herd immunity with all the natural immunity we're going to get that it's essentially over. There isn't really another outcome, I think, at this point.
To that end, President Biden laid out some new rules and incentives in the rush to get the U.S. vaccination numbers up. He called on state and local governments to offer $100 to residents who get vaccinated now. Federal employees will have to get vaccinated or face regular testing. That extends to the military. Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas, the latest cities where masks are a requirement indoors again, regardless of your vaccination status.
Yeah, so more mask mandates, but not vaccine mandates in some of these cities. It's just, I'm going to lose my mind today. The 7-day average of deaths in Washington, D.C., by the way, 0. Big fat 0. That's how many people are dying of COVID in Washington. And also, that's a city where there's no capacity limit. So basically, you can go into a jam-packed restaurant in Adams Morgan. You have to wear a mask to go in, and then you can go sit unmasked among 100 other unmasked people, eat maskless, and then put your mask on when you leave. It's theater at this point. It's just arbitrary. And in addition to feeling like it's these politicians are just doing something for the sake of doing it, really what this does, and this is going to sound really callous, and I'm just going to throw that out there, but the masking makes it harder for unvaccinated people to get COVID. And frankly, the way to end this is for them to get it, because eventually they're going to. Right? This thing is so contagious that eventually, if you're not vaccinated, you are going to get this virus. God, let's hope that if and when that happens, that it's not severe. But I just think that that's like I said, that's how it's going to burn out now. And again, it's just what we've said the last time with LA, the mask mandates confuse people by making it seem like the vaccines don't work. And the other thing, Jill, and I wanted to mention this, you made this point yesterday about with Biden doing the vaccine mandate, but also leaving it open if you're not vaccinated that you can get regular tests. And I just want to highlight what you said, because it's true. A mandate isn't really a mandate if there's like a major exception for testing, right? And
an exception that's not that big of a deal to get it, right? I mean, a nose swab, like what's the big, what?
Well, yes, that's true. But the problem is, I mean, has anybody asked Biden or Cuomo, because he's doing the same thing in New York, how exactly we plan on doing regular testing for unvaccinated employees? I mean, there are 2.1 million civilian federal employees in this country. Even if you assume that just 20% of them are unvaccinated, which would be low, that's 400,000 people who need to be tested ideally every single day. Who's doing that? Who's paying for it? Better question. Am I? Are you? Yes. The answer to that question is yes, we're paying for it. And all of this, it's because everybody in power who holds any power in this country, they're just too scared of their own constituents or the public unions to do the hard thing, which is say straight up, get the vaccine. We're at war. This is a wartime footing in this country. Get vaxxed or stay home and lock yourself in your room. That's it. It's pathetic.
You know what? I totally agree with you. And I hadn't thought about the cost of testing. It's going to be astronomical.
Yeah.
And of course, for federal workers, we're going to pay for it. If it's a private company,
right, yes,
the company figures it out. But I think that that's a really, really good point. State workers as well, and local government workers. One thing that I wanted to read from, there was a good op-ed in the Washington Post, which basically saying that there should not be any more restrictions. The title, Vaccinated Americans are more likely to die from a lightning strike than COVID. Don't bring back restrictions. While it's tragic that some unvaccinated Americans are suffering, for the vaccinated, the pandemic is over. The rise in COVID-19 cases among the unvaccinated poses no serious threat to those who have been immunized. The data is clear. According to the CDC, as of July 19th, the grand total of 4,072 vaccinated Americans had been hospitalized with symptomatic breakthrough infections out of more than 161 million who have been fully vaccinated. That is a rate of 0.003%. Of those hospitalized, only 849 have died of COVID-19, which means the death rate 0.0005% for people who've been vaccinated. Putting into perspective, your chance of dying from a lightning strike is higher.
Yeah.
Your chance of dying from seasonal flu, much higher. If you're vaccinated, you have a greater chance of dying from a hornet, wasp, or bee sting, a dog attack, a car crash, drowning, sunstroke, or choking on food than you do from dying from COVID-19.
Yeah.
So just an interesting perspective, I think. And like I said, I think you make a great point about the cost of testing.
Yeah.
It's just, wow, I didn't really think about it, but you're right.
Well, because we never figured out
paying for it.
We never figured out the testing thing in this country. Just quickly on that op-ed, the death numbers are actually probably even lower, right? Because I think what happens in some cases is somebody gets vaccinated and then they die, because that's what happens. People die, and there may not be any causal relationship between the vaccine, but it gets sort of like lumped into that, like, well, they just got vaccinated, so maybe it was.
And, you know, I think you also make a great point about just the CDC. Look, why is this being leaked to the media? Just
Yes.
if this is the data, tell us about it. If this is what you found out. And look, they have been, Israel, who's been ahead of the United States in the vaccination game and in terms of getting the pandemic under control, has been saying for a while now, they've been sounding the alarm about the Delta variant. They put mask mandates back in place earlier.
They're doing
than we
boosters
did.
now.
And they're doing boosters, which I wanted to mention, for people 60 and older. They're giving that third vaccine shot. The CDC is still saying we don't have data, we don't have data. Why not just like come out ahead of that even? It just seems like, once again, to your point, the CDC
Risk avoidance.
is not really being totally transparent. And then it makes it harder. That is why there's so much distrust of the vaccine and everything they're saying.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to Tokyo, because Suni Lee stepped in for Simone Biles at the Olympics yesterday, and she delivered big time. Lee nailed every routine in the women's gymnastics all-around final to win gold, including a bars routine considered the hardest in the world. The 18-year-old keeps the streak alive of American women winning the event at every Olympics since 2004. I want to talk a little bit more about this video for family in a minute, because it was just incredible. But look, she could be back next week as well for just the individual. So this was the all around where they do every single piece of equipment, the beam, etc. Next week, she could just do the bars. There's more opportunity for her to get gold.
One of my favorite things of the Olympics this year is the videos of like the family members back home watching live and reacting. Those reaction videos are great. One thing that broke overnight here, Simone Biles took to Instagram to sort of talk a little bit more about the reason why she withdrew. She blames something called the twisties, which I didn't know about, but it apparently is a relatively common sort of ailment among gymnasts, where they literally forget how to twist in the air. It's like a mental block. Quoting from her on Instagram, "Literally cannot tell up from down. It's the craziest feeling ever, not having an inch of control over your body." So, end quote. So I think that just tells, you know, she got lumped in this thing as like, she quit because of mental health concerns, but this is more than that, right? This is like a physical ailment, right? This would be like if you go out and, you know, you're a race car driver and like you forget how to turn.
Apparently a lot of, so I'm not a gymnast, but apparently gymnasts who heard this were like, okay,
yeah, the
makes
twisties,
sense.
right. Mm-hmm.
A little bit more about Suni Lee. So she's part of the Hmong community. She's the first Hmong American to make an Olympic team. According to USA Today, her parents were children in the late 1970s when they and their families fled Laos to refugee camps in Thailand and then eventually resettled in Minnesota. The largest communities of Hmong reside in California and Minnesota. About 81,000 live in St. Paul, Minneapolis. So this is a community that's, I was just listening to an interview with one of the reporters who was actually with her family when they were watching the performance. She was saying that this community sometimes feels left out when we talk about Asian Americans. They sometimes feel like their story is so different. Lee grew up without a lot of money. You know, we talked yesterday about her father built her a balance beam in their backyard that is still there. And in many ways, it was this community that got her to where she is now, because they basically would have to fundraise for her uniforms, fundraise for competitions, and just again, that video that we saw yesterday of her family and friends watching her performance when the judges announced that she got gold. I was crying. I actually just was writing some notes this morning, and I was again tearing up because it's
amazing.
I mean, what they have put into this, and to just see it all the way through is incredible.
Especially under the conditions of this year, right?
And again, so she's going to be performing next week as well. Also, Jade Carey, who was the other American who performed, she didn't do quite as well, but she's great. She just didn't medal. She has a chance to medal next week as well for the individual competitions. So
also, track and field, I believe, starts today, now that we're at the midpoint of these Olympics.
Okay, New Jersey is going to be the first state to offer free nurse visits to mothers immediately after they give birth, regardless of whether they are insured. The new measure signed by Governor Phil Murphy meant to cut down on maternal and infant mortality rates. New Jersey is one of the highest rates of mothers who die from pregnancy-related complications, with black mothers 7 times more likely to die than white mothers. The state program is going to offer families up to 3 free wellness checks from registered nurses in the first 3 months after their baby is born. It will be available to adoptive parents and parents who experience stillbirth too. Oregon has a similar program, but it just doesn't go quite as far.
You know, I love this story, and again, maybe it's just because I'm in like sort of baby brain here, but I thought this was so great, and I thought it got a little bit undercovered yesterday, so I wanted to put it in today. You know, one of the, Jill, I know you and I talked about this offline, but like one of the most unnerving feelings when you have a baby is like you're in the hospital, right, and you're incessantly taken care of by all of these well-trained professionals who are like constantly checking on you and telling you what to do, and then you get discharged and they just sort of like send you onto the street with this new baby, and you're like, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Right? It's like really, it's like a really like profound moment. So look, anything that we do as a society that makes the burden of becoming a parent less, especially the burden on the mother, I 100% support. And you know, Becky always talks about coming from Europe. Her sister, who lives in Finland, she gets 1 year paid leave by the government. She's not even a citizen, just as somebody who lives there. And check this out: the government in Finland even sends you, as a pregnant woman, a little wooden box full of essentials like toys and wipes and stuff. And the box itself is meant to double as a bassinet for like the early days. Can you just imagine that happening in this country?
No, but I totally agree with you. There's the show Working Moms on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it.
I remember you used to rave about it. Yeah,
it's such a good show. But I actually had this conversation with like some random mom influencer on social media because she was, they talk about how difficult it is to go back to work, and I was messaging with her and I said, yeah, they're in Canada. That show's based in Canada. Those moms had basically like a year off before they had to go back to work. And you and I have discussed this because you and I candidly were first kind of becoming friendly when I got back from maternity leave because you took over writing Need2Know when I went on maternity leave, and then we started doing the podcast when I came back. And I was like, you see my mental state, like you're so fragile, like your hormones are crazy. It was 3 months later, I'm pumping in the makeup room, you're in the room, we're talking about whatever, you're trying to navigate, coming back in. It is so challenging. It's so, and the difficulties are not really talked about. And I think that especially when you have a kid, you make a great point, especially that first baby, when they throw you out of the hospital. I remember my husband and I, after like 2 days, okay, so you're allowed basically 2 nights or whatever.
Right.
They want you out. And I remember we're gonna check out, like we'll take the latest checkout on the day. We're like, we have to leave Wednesday, but could we we're gonna leave like 5 p.m. They're like, checkouts in the morning, lady. And I
we're
just
flipping
remember
this bed.
It was by like 11 a.m. We're out there. My husband's trying to figure out how to do the car seat, and it is just crazy. Like they send you out into the Wild West, basically.
Yeah. So look, more free wellness visits. Absolutely, that's great. Good for New Jersey.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about the economy. The U.S. economy grew at a disappointing rate in the second quarter, but we are now back to pre-pandemic levels of output. GDP rose 1.6% in Q2 for an annualized rate of 6.5%. It's incredibly strong, but it shows the economy rebounding faster than it did after the Great Recession. However, it is still below the expectations that the economy was going to be growing at an 8% clip by now.
Yeah, I was expecting a blowout number for this GDP. Delta messed it up, as it has everything else this summer of disappointment here. That data showing that the ongoing supply chain disruptions that we've been talking about, whatever it is, chips, lumber, everything, just continuing to hamstring growth, especially in sectors like the housing market, where they just can't build houses fast enough. When that gets ironed out, I think the economy is really going to fly. But again, this Delta thing really throws a wrench into...
I think but I don't even know if it had to do with Delta as much as it had to do with the supply chain.
Yeah, that was mostly
issues
it.
that you were messaging, because Delta is still so relatively new. Delta, I think, is going to really have the impact in this next quarter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, Scarlett Johansson sent a shockwave through Hollywood yesterday. She is suing Disney for a breach of contract after that studio opened Black Widow in theaters and on demand at the same time. So I saw this and I'm like, what's the issue here? So Johansson's suit argues that the decision had the effect of depressing ticket sales, which the box office numbers bear out. And as the star of the film, her salary was tied to how well it did in theaters. So she claims she lost $50 million due to the day and date release strategy that's become a pandemic trend. Fascinating. That is one angle of this kind of box office story and our changing movie habits that I really had not thought of.
Yeah, because a lot of these actors, right, they get points on the back end, as it's known, which is where they get relatively small payment up front. But if the movie does well, they make serious coin. It does seem like a pretty obvious breach of contract if your comp is tied to that. And it seems like what happened here, at least based on the reporting out of the trades in Hollywood, is ScarJo tried to renegotiate her contract early in the pandemic, knowing that this was a possibility, and Disney had none of it. That's interesting because Warner Brothers has been doing the same strategy of day and date, putting things out on streaming and theaters on the same day, but they renegotiated their talent contracts. They spent $200 million to avoid this. Disney did not, but so we're going to see more of these suits as the studios tinker with these release strategies. And also, it's just not a good look to be in a court fight with like our most bankable star, right?
Wow. Curious to see how this one plays out and if that's going to impact not only their strategy, but hopefully they'll just renegotiate these contracts. Okay, let's do a little Love Hate 8 to finish off the podcast today.
All right, Jill, one thing we love this week, The White Lotus on HBO. I've been singing the praises of this show. I feel like nobody's watching it, but it's this like dark comedy satire. It's on HBO Max. I think it's so funny. It's sort of like in the rich people working out their problems vein, which I think that genre it can get a little tiresome, but this one is really quite clever. Excellent performances all around, really great scenery, really good writing, so I recommend it. I think you particularly would actually really like it.
I can't wait. I've been watching Manifest, which is now on Netflix.
Oh yeah, is that any
which
good?
is getting a lot of buzz. It's good. I do like it, and it's like it's mindless. You can kind of watch it and zone out a little bit. But I think this will be my next one.
Good.
All right, one thing that we hate. The general mosquito gnat situation this summer. Is it just us, or are there more of them than usual? Also, I particularly hate when there's just kind of a random gnat or fly that won't leave you alone or stop flying around your head. I feel like this happens to me all the time when I try to go running, and it's like, what? Why is this focusing on my head here? You know, so that is a big hate.
So here's a question for you, because we both are sort of fair-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes people. Do you get the mosquitoes the way that I get them? Mosquitoes are my mortal enemy.
Is that a thing that it's?
Yeah,
I mean, I have brown eyes, and I'm not naturally blonde, but.
Oh well.
But
here's what I know.
I didn't realize that was a thing.
Yeah, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that. My mom has always told me that mosquitoes really like fair-skinned people, and that the evidence bears it out because they just destroy me the minute I go outside in the summer. But for other people who are dealing with this, I have discovered a very good mosquito hack, which is a fan.
Yeah.
They hate the wind. This maybe is obvious. I didn't realize this. They hate the wind. So if you have a fan when you're outside and you blast it, they will leave you alone. Okay, and finally, one thing we ate, I just got some peaches, blueberries, some big beefsteak tomatoes, and corn from the farmer's market the other day. This is the time of the year for the farmer's market, especially in the Northeast. This is when the produce is good. So go out there, support your local farmers, and get some of that good produce. All
right, now we're hungry. Okay, that is what you need to know for Friday, July 30th.
I can't believe I didn't know your eye color. I've been looking at you for like 3 years now. I'm sorry. All right, guys.
Not a problem.
Have a good weekend.